I'm gonna hang on to that take you just had on Kevin Durant because I think it is a great segue into a spicy topic that's going on in the NBA right now. But we're not finished with this conversation. When it comes to Steph and the end of his legacy, where do you think he'll fall when it comes to all-time greats? I've never heard so many people right now, and it must be just kind of the moment, I guess, but so many people when you talk about the finals and the Warriors winning, they're so quick to be like, "Oh, that makes him number 10." Or as specific as, "Oh, he's the 11th best player." And I'm like, "Wait,
No,
what?"
yeah, it's your list. It's who's your favorite
Yeah.
player, who you idolize. My guy
But he's up
Andre,
there.
and look, yeah, fine, yeah, he's a top 10 player. Yeah, he's a top 10 player all time because everything he's doing is going to continue. It's like when
Mm-hmm.
LeBron James breaks a scoring record, he's going to continue pushing it. So it's like,
Yeah.
bro, you ain't got to pass Kareem anymore. You ain't got to get to that number. What you got to do is you got to play another probably 2-3 seasons to catch Bron. I'll say this, right? And I'm as a Magic Johnson fan and all this like stuff. Like I don't like to compare. I just want to make sure that people understand like what you say when this. Like Allen Iverson, what position is Allen Iverson?
Point guard,
Are we sure?
shooting guard,
Yes. Allen Iverson's a shooting guard. Now he can play point. He can drop dimes. He can do all of those things. But we typically only call those
small
guys
forward.
position. No, but I'm saying we call them, but you just say them all. They call them that based off
That's
of
what the
their,
game is.
but a lot of times it's based off of their size. It's based off of their
Mm-hmm.
size, right? So like when you look at Allen Iverson, he was a two guard. He had Eric Snow on his team during his most successful year. So oftentimes Eric Snow, he would do is he would play the point, let AI be the one, and then he would guard the two and let AI guard the one, so that
The one.
AI wasn't forced to guard much bigger players. And to me, it reminds me so much of who Steph is, right? And the way he plays, there is not one attribute that you would contribute to Steph as a point guard, right? And that's not a knock. But
Thank,
before you idiots start
thank
doing that,
you.
before you idiots stop doing that, he's the greatest shooter of all time, greatest 3-point shooter of all time. He is a shooting guard. He is a shooting guard, and it is a beautiful thing. But this is my theory. The reason why people want to call him a point guard is because they feel like he can move up that ranks of all-time shooting guards. Like I think he's, if you say point guards, the people that you talk about in recent basketball history a lot of times are Jason Kidd, Steve Nash. Um, no, no, yeah, no, thank you, no, thank you. Is it? No, yeah, leave it, leave it. Anyway, sorry about that. When you talk about Jason Kidd, Steve Nash, Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, John Stockton, that list, when you look at Steph's accolades, it's easy. There's only one guy that you would probably compare him to in modern day, right? It would be like the Isaiah Thomas, it would be the Magic Johnson. That's the only one. Obviously John Stockton with the assist and all that stuff. But when you look at two guards, they don't want to go down that two guard route because that two guard route includes MJ, which he can't do. Like that's not on him. When you talk about two guards, then you end up talking about Kobe Bryant. You don't want to start a Steph versus Kobe argument. So like, well, he's a point guard. It's like, okay, well, let's see this. Does Steph initiate their offense? No. When is Steph is at his best? When he is off the ball, like a shooting guard. So all the success that they have, Draymond, Andre, Jarrett Jack, his first year when he played point, Jarrett Jack, or the first year when he broke the 3-point record, Jarrett Jack was a point guard. Steph and Clay were the wings running around and knocking down threes. So it's hard for me to establish you as a point guard other than your height and your quote unquote starting position when you play off the ball. You typically don't lead your team in assists. Don't quote me on that. I had to go back and check the stats. I know that's Draymond's normally the initiator of the offense. And then you have guys like Andre and Livingston, big wings that can handle the ball and distribute so he can play off the ball. So for me, that says if you look at every single thing of his criteria, where he's at his best, what his skill set is, it says shooting guard. But they don't want to compare him to other shooting guards because then you get to the MJ Kobe conversations, even Jerry West, and you just don't want to have those conversations. So they're like, he's a point guard, and we're going to compare him to Magic Johnson, who was all time in the league in
But
assists.
completely
And you're
opposite.
like,
Completely opposite.
the skill set and the focus of what he does is different. One of the things, like for LeBron and Shaq, what do those two guys need? Shaq needed a late game finisher. LeBron needs shooters around him
Shooters.
because his skill set says if you put me with 4 shooters and defenders, we're gonna go. Right? With Steph, it's like if you get me with intelligent people that know how to handle the basketball, I'm going to create havoc with my movement, and he is the greatest that we have ever seen at it. So nothing about that particular skill set. Not saying that Steph doesn't run their offense. Not saying that Steph doesn't do all of the things that a point guard does. It's positionless
Basketball
basketball.
minds, basketball individuals understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it is positionless basketball, and Steph is one of the top 10 players of all time because he's going to continue adding to it. If he were to stop today, that's the argument. But I think that he's the greatest point guard, or he's surpassed Magic Johnson, who scored 42 as a rookie in the NBA Finals, and has 3 Finals MVPs, has 3 MVPs. Let's slow down respectfully and not forget that also Michael Jordan's career, or Magic Johnson's career, was cut short, due to all of the things that we know. So he probably had 2 or 3 more years, maybe not win a championship, but to add to some of these numbers. So that's my only thing. Steph is a bad man, top 10 all time, greatest shooter we've ever seen, and freaking good for him.
Before we kind of close up this conversation, you want to give your props to Clay and Steph?
Yeah, there's this one thing that I would say, as being on their team and playing against them, there's always been this underlying resentment, just from like players. Like a lot of NBA players come from very, different backgrounds. Some come from nothing. And so I think there was a little bit of I don't want to say resentment, but some of like, you didn't have the same path as like a lot of other guys that came from different backgrounds. Steph and Clay's dads both played in the NBA. So in your brain, you think money for trainers, money for camps, money for shoes. Like, I remember having holes in my shoes and having to put a little cardboard in it so that I could keep rocking because that toe had worn down so much. Like, there was a grind. There was an idea that that's where like you have to fight to get there. And I think there was a little bit of resentment from players when it came to Steph and Clay. It's like, what adversity have these guys had to get here? Well, they've had a ton. But in the same breath, I've heard NBA players talk about the stress that might come from their own kids. I've talked to Bron and seen the stress that he feels like Bronny and Bryce have to deal with. Shit, they made a movie about it in Space Jam 2, right? I've talked to different guys like Rondo and different guys that are like, man, I've just, I put pressure on my kids. Like, I named Richard, Little Richard. Luke Walton, one of my best friends in the entire world, coming from his dad. They have a different type of pressure and expectation that people don't fully respect. So while they didn't come from a single parent household or a parent that had nothing or raised by they didn't have that background. So a lot of guys would look at them like, oh, these kids were private school kids and they had it easy and their dad, his dad taught them how to shoot, and Clay grew up around the Lakers. That couldn't be any further from the truth. Like, Steph went to Davidson. Clay went to Washington State. And Washington State's some shit. We will beat them like 26 straight times. But they didn't have this easy path. I'm just throwing a shot. They didn't have this easy path. And I think that a lot of times there's this misconception that because they came from dads that were great players, their path was easy. It was different. But the pressure on them in these moments when it's time to perform was actually harder. And I just want to make sure that people understand, while they might have come from fortunate backgrounds, their path
One of my favorite all-time quotes is,
if not
hard work
harder
beats
than other
talent when
people's.
talent doesn't work hard. No matter what that path is, and again, I think we all are mature enough to understand that like everyone's path is different. It doesn't mean that yours is more or less than the next person. Like, they still have had to work. And I think that's the one thing that they both can say about themselves is the place in which they've got to. It's not just because they're dads. It's not just
Damn
because
right.
of the position that they're in. And I'll take this one step further just for myself.
No.
I got a lot of that hate, and I know we all have a scrapbook, but in high school, I'm a principal's kid. And everyone thought just because I was the high school principal's daughter, I was on varsity as a freshman. No, I worked my ass off. I was in the gym every single day, every single morning when that freaking alarm clock went off and I didn't want to get up and my dad's screaming across the hallway. Yeah, did I have the keys to the door? Yeah, but I also have teammates that could have asked to come with me. I still think that there is a...
You also use those keys.
So
you have to use those
respect
keys.
And I love that you wanted to address that and talk about that. And I think you can take it full circle too to right now. We just had Sharif O'Neal, who is obviously in the draft or wanting to be drafted. In the conversation that came down, when you talk about pressure, Shaq didn't want him to go to the draft. He wanted him to stay for another year because Shaq, and rightfully so, I respect all of this. He's a big guy when it comes to education, and he wanted Sharif to stay in school. And guess what Sharif said at 22 years old? I know what I want. I'm ready for this. I want to take this opportunity. And he believes in himself. And I think there is that whole understanding of wanting to create your own, especially when your father has done so much already, and he is his name, but you want to create that own name for yourself. So yeah, I love that perspective that you gave.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and look, when I just want to make sure people understand, when I say resentment, it's not like people like they're the two most likable superstars.
I mean, did
that
you
we might
see
have
the
had in a
parade
while,
for Clay?
right?
Did you see the
It's
amount
from
of
the stand
fumbles,
of, like,
the hat running over the lady, dropping the ring?
Yeah, yeah, that's
amazing.
Look, I had Clay as a rookie, and when I tell you Clay is one of the most all-time people that you will ever see and experience. But I don't think that, like, I think some of it's weighing down because they've obviously earned their stripes. But I think these are the moments where you look at and it's like Clay, like coming back from the injuries. That don't have shit to do with his dad. Coming back from those injuries and having to put in that work for 2 years, that don't have shit to do with his pops. That's about what's in him. And so I just think, like, I definitely want to make sure that we acknowledge that, because those guys are just different. And Mark Jackson, shout out, said that they were the greatest shooting backcourt that he'd ever seen in 2012. Wow. He said that. 2012. Then 10 years later, these dudes have won 4 championships.
Because they work. They put work into their craft. They're everything but lazy.